The moment Martha Bennett saw Silas Granger's cold eyes settle on her across the cemetery, she knew her father's death in the mine collapse had brought her nothing but trouble. She stood beside the fresh grave on that bitter March morning in 1878, her worn black dress doing little to shield her from the wind that cut down from the mountains surrounding Dillon, Montana. 22 years old and suddenly alone in the world, Martha had thought the worst was behind her. The explosion that had killed her father and 3 other men 2 weeks ago had shattered her life, but she had believed she could rebuild. She had believed wrong. Silas Granger approached with deliberate steps, his expensive coat and polished boots marking him as a man of means in a town where most folks scraped by on hope and hard work. He owned the Silver Bell Mine, the largest employer in Dillon, and he carried himself like he owned the souls of everyone who depended on his operation for their livelihoods. At 45, he was a widower with a reputation for getting what he wanted, one way or another. "Miss Bennett," he said, removing his hat with false courtesy, "a terrible tragedy. Your father was a good worker." Martha met his gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "He was a good man, Mr. Granger, better than most." Indeed. Granger's thin lips curved in something that might have been a smile but held no warmth. "Which is why I feel obligated to discuss a rather delicate matter with you. Perhaps we could speak privately." The handful of mourners who had gathered began to drift away, sensing the conversation was not meant for their ears. Martha's friend Sarah touched her arm briefly in support before leaving with her husband. Within moments, Martha stood alone with the mine owner beside her father's grave. "I will be direct," Granger said, replacing his hat. "Your father owed the company store a considerable sum, $237 to be precise. There's also the matter of the cabin you occupy, which belongs to the mining company. Without your father's employment, you have no claim to either the debt forgiveness or the housing." Martha had known about the debt. Her father had been supporting them both on a miner's wages, and when he had broken his leg the previous winter, they had survived on credit from the company store. But $237 might as well have been $2,000. She had no way to pay it. "I will find work," she said, lifting her chin. "I can cook, clean, take in laundry. I will pay what is owed." "That would take years," Granger said dismissively. "And where would you live while you worked? The cabin must be vacated for the next miner I hire. No, Miss Bennett, I have a different proposal, one that would resolve all your difficulties and provide you with security for life." The way he looked at her then made her skin crawl. His gaze traveled from her face down her body with an assessment that had nothing to do with her ability to work off a debt. "Become my wife," he said bluntly. "The debt will be forgiven. You will live in comfort, and you will never want for anything. I need a woman to manage my household and provide companionship. You need protection and financial security. It is a practical arrangement." Martha felt the words like a physical blow. She stepped back instinctively, nearly stumbling on the uneven ground. "I cannot," she said. "I do not love you, Mr. Granger. I barely know you." His expression hardened. "Love is a luxury, Miss Bennett. You are in no position to indulge in luxuries. I am offering you a way out of destitution. Refuse me, and you will find yourself on the street with nowhere to go and no one to help you. I will make certain of it." "That is not a proposal," Martha said, anger rising to burn away the fear. "That is a threat." "Call it what you like," Granger said coldly. "You have until Monday morning to give me your answer. That gives you 3 days to contemplate your options, though I think you will find you have none. Good day, Miss Bennett." He walked away without another word, leaving Martha shaking beside her father's grave. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of snow from the mountains. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to think. 3 days. She had 3 days to find a solution to an impossible problem. That evening, Martha sat in the small cabin that had been her home for the past 6 years since her mother had died and her father had brought her west from Missouri in search of a fresh start. The fire in the hearth burned low, and she fed it another piece of wood, watching the flames catch and spread. The cabin was sparsely furnished but had been made comfortable with her mother's quilts and the small touches that turned a house into a home. The thought of leaving it hurt, but the thought of becoming Silas Granger's wife was unbearable. She had a few coins saved, perhaps enough to buy stage fare to another town, but what would she do when she arrived? She had no family, no connections, and a woman traveling alone was vulnerable to all manner of dangers. yet staying seemed equally impossible. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She rose cautiously, aware of how isolated the cabin was, set apart from the main cluster of minor housing. Through the window, she could see nothing but darkness and the faint glimmer of snow beginning to fall. "Who is there?" she called. "Name is Boone Eldridge, miss," came a deep voice. "I'm looking for the Bennett place." Martha did not recognize the name, but something in the voice made her open the door a crack, keeping it chained. A man stood in the circle of lamplight from within, and she had to tilt her head back to see his face. He was massive, easily 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the doorway. Long, dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But his eyes caught her attention most. They were a striking blue, bright against his tanned skin, and they held an intelligence and directness that put her slightly at ease. "I am Martha Bennett," she said carefully. "What is your business?" "I knew your father," Boone said. "Worked with him in the mines back in '69 down in Virginia City. Heard about the accident, came to pay my respects. Arrived too late for the funeral, I reckon." Martha studied him a moment longer, then unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. "You should come in out of the snow." He hesitated, as if aware of the impropriety, then nodded and stepped inside. He had to duck to clear the doorframe, and once inside, he seemed to fill the small cabin with his presence. He wore buckskins and furs, the clothing of a man who spent most of his time in the wilderness, and he carried a rifle with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. A hunting knife hung at his belt, and there was a wildness about him that spoke of mountains and open spaces. "Thank you for coming," Martha said, closing the door against the cold. "My father spoke of his time in Virginia City sometimes. He had good memories of those days." "He was a good man," Boone said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Saved my life once when a tunnel started to collapse, got me out before the timber gave way completely. I have always owed him for that." Martha felt tears prick her eyes at the thought of her father's courage, the same courage that had ultimately cost him his life. He would have said he was just doing what anyone would do. "Maybe," Boone said, "but not everyone does it. Most men freeze or run. He acted." He paused, those blue eyes studying her face. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Bennett. Thomas spoke of you often when we worked together. He loved you very much." The tears spilled over then, and Martha turned away, embarrassed to cry in front of a stranger. But she had held herself together through the accident, through the funeral, through Granger's horrible proposal, and now this simple kindness from a man who remembered her father broke through her defenses. She felt a gentle touch on her shoulder, and then Boone was guiding her to the chair by the fire. He crouched beside it, his large frame somehow managing to seem unthreatening despite his size. "It's all right to grieve," he said quietly. "No shame in tears." "I do not have time for tears," Martha said, wiping her face roughly with her hands. "I have bigger problems than grief." Boone tilted his head, waiting. There was a patience about him, a stillness that suggested he was a man accustomed to listening more than talking. And so, perhaps because he had been her father's friend, perhaps because she was desperate and had no one else to talk to, Martha told him everything. She told him about the debt, about Granger's proposal, about the 3-day deadline that was ticking away like a clock counting down to her doom. When she finished, Boone remained quiet for a long moment. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. Then he stood, his expression dark. "Granger is trying to force your hand," he said. "Using your father's death to get what he wants. That is not right." "Right or not, what can I do?" Martha said helplessly. "He holds all the power. He owns the mine, the store, this cabin. He controls the work in this town. If I refuse him, he will make sure no one helps me." "He does not control me," Boone said simply. "I do not work for him, do not owe him, and do not fear him." Martha looked up at him, hope flickering to life despite her better judgment. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that I talk to Mr. Granger," Boone said. "Man to man. Make it clear that you are not alone and that he cannot bully you into a marriage you do not want." "He will not listen," Martha said, though she wanted desperately to believe otherwise. "He's a powerful man in this town." "Power is relative," Boone said. "A rich man in a town is still just a man in the mountains, and I know these mountains better than anyone." There was something in his voice, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with bravado and everything to do with capability. Martha believed him when he said he knew the mountains. She could see it in the way he moved, the weather-worn quality of his skin, the alertness in his eyes. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me. You owed my father a debt, but surely that debt does not extend to fighting my battles." Boone looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "Maybe I am fighting my own battle too," he said. "I have seen too many powerful men take what they want from those who cannot fight back. I spent years in the mountains, trapping and hunting, to get away from that kind of thing. But when I hear about it happening to the daughter of a man who saved my life, I cannot just walk away." Martha felt warmth spread through her chest, gratitude, and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you," she said softly. "Truly." Boone nodded. "I will go see Granger first thing in the morning. Meanwhile, you lock this door and do not open it for anyone but me. Understood?" "Understood," Martha said. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Your father was right to be proud of you," he said. "You have got his strength." Then he was gone, disappearing into the snowy night like a ghost. Martha locked the door and returned to the fire, her mind spinning. She did not know what Boone Eldridge could possibly say to change Silas Granger's mind, but for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was not facing the world completely alone. Morning came cold and clear, the snow from the night before covering Dylan in a fresh white blanket. Martha rose early, as was her habit, and made coffee and cornbread for breakfast. She had just finished eating when she heard the sound of raised voices outside. She rushed to the window and peered out, her heart sinking. Boone stood in the street in front of her cabin, and facing him was Silas Granger, mounted on a fine black horse. Behind Granger were two of his hired men, rough-looking fellows who served as enforcers more than miners. Martha threw a shawl around her shoulders and hurried outside, the cold air biting at her exposed skin. "This is none of your concern, Eldridge," Granger was saying, his face red with anger. "The woman owes me a debt, and I have offered her a way to settle it. That is between her and me." "You're not offering her a way to settle a debt," Boone said, his voice calm but carrying an edge like steel. "You're using the debt to force her into marriage. That makes it extortion, and that makes it my concern." "Your concern?" Granger laughed, a harsh sound. "You are nobody, a mountain man with no ties to this town or anyone in it. What makes you think you have any say in this matter?" "I am making it my say," Boone said. "Miss Bennett does not want to marry you. The debt was her father's, and he died in your mind because your safety measures are not adequate. Seems to me you owe her, not the other way around." Granger's expression turned dangerous. "You're treading on thin ice. Eldridge, I suggest you move along before you find yourself in a situation you cannot get out of." "Is that a threat?" Boone asked, and despite the cold morning, there was heat in his voice now. Martha could not let this escalate. She stepped forward, drawing both men's attention. "Please," she said, "stop this. Mr. Granger, I need more time to consider your proposal. Surely you can grant me that much." "I gave you 3 days," Granger said coldly. "You have 2 days remaining. But let me make something clear, Miss Bennett. If you think this mountain man can protect you, you are mistaken. I control everything in this town, your food, your shelter, your ability to work. Send him away or you will regret it." "She does not need the town," Boone said suddenly. "She can come with me." Martha stared at him, shocked. Granger looked equally surprised, then his expression twisted with rage. "You cannot be serious," the mine owner said. "Take her where? To the mountains? To live like an animal in some cave or cabin? What kind of life is that for a woman?" "A better life than being married to a man who threatens and bullies her," Boone said flatly. "Miss Bennett, if you are willing, I have a cabin about a day's ride from here, up in the mountains. It is well built, warm, and stocked with supplies. You would be safe there until we figure out a better solution. I give you my word, I mean you no harm." Martha's mind raced. Go with a man she had met only hours ago into the wilderness? It seemed insane. But looking at Granger's furious face, at the 2 enforcers who looked ready to drag her away by force, it also seemed like the only option that gave her any chance of freedom. "I need to think," she said. "No," Granger said sharply. "No more thinking. You will give me your answer now, Miss Bennett, right now. Will you honor your father's debt and become my wife, or will you throw your lot in with this vagrant and condemn yourself to ruin?" The way he said it, the ultimatum in his voice, made Martha's decision for her. She turned to Boone, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I will go with you," she said. Granger's face went white with rage, then flushed scarlet. "You stupid girl," he hissed. "You have just made the worst mistake of your life. When you come crawling back begging for my protection, I will not be so generous." "I will not come crawling back," Martha said, finding her courage. "And you have no right to my father's debt. He died working for you. Consider his life payment enough." "The law does not see it that way," Granger said viciously, "and I am the law in this town. You are stealing from me, Miss Bennett, and I will see you pay for it." "Try to collect," Boone said, stepping between Martha and Granger. "But know this, if you or your men come after her, you will answer to me, and I do not play by town rules." For a moment, Martha thought Granger might order his men to attack right there, but something in Boone's stance, in the absolute certainty in his voice, made the mine owner hesitate. He yanked on his horse's reins, turning the animal roughly. "This is not over," he spat. Then he rode away, his enforcers following. Martha stood in the snowy street, shaking with adrenaline and fear and relief, all mixed together. Boone turned to her, his expression serious. "Get what you need from the cabin," he said, quickly. "We need to be gone before he changes his mind and comes back with more men." Martha nodded and hurried inside. She moved through the cabin in a daze, grabbing her warmest clothes, her mother's quilt, a few personal items, the small amount of money she had saved. She tied everything into a bundle, took one last look at the home she was leaving behind, and stepped back outside. Boone had a large bay horse waiting, already saddled. Martha had ridden before, but never on a journey into the mountains in March. The thought terrified her, but she forced the fear down. She had made her choice. Boone helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her with easy grace despite his size. His arms came around her to take the reins, and Martha felt the solid strength of him at her back. It should have frightened her, being so close to a man she barely knew, but instead, she felt safe. "Hold on," Boone said, and then they were moving, leaving Dillon behind. They rode for hours, climbing steadily into the mountains. The trail was narrow and treacherous in places, covered with snow and ice, but Boone guided the horse with confidence. He seemed to know every twist and turn, every safe place to step. As they climbed, the air grew colder and thinner, and Martha found herself grateful for Boone's body heat behind her. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and eat some dried meat and hardtack Boone produced from his saddlebags. Martha's legs ached from riding, and her hands were numb despite her gloves. "How much farther?" she asked, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. "Another few hours," Boone said. "The cabin is in a valley protected from the worst of the wind. It will be warmer there." "You live there alone?" "Mostly," he said. "Sometimes I take furs down to trade in town, but I spend most of my time in the mountains. I like the quiet." Martha studied him in the pale sunlight. His face was hard-planed and weathered, but there was kindness in the lines around his eyes. "Are you not lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I learned a long time ago that being alone is better than being around people who want to use you or hurt you." "What happened to make you feel that way?" Martha asked softly. Boone was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I grew up in a mining town much like Dillon. My father worked in the mines and my mother took in laundry. We were poor, but we got by. Then one day there was an accident. Cave-in killed a dozen men, including my father. The mine owner, a man much like Granger, refused to pay compensation to the families, said the miners knew the risks when they signed on. My mother could not make enough on her own to support me and my two sisters. She died the next winter from pneumonia, working herself to exhaustion trying to keep us fed." Martha's heart ached for him. "What happened to your sisters?" "They were taken in by different families," Boone said, his voice rough. "I was 14, big for my age, so I was put to work in the mines. Spent 4 years down in the dark, breathing rock dust and praying the ceiling would not come down on my head. When I turned 18, I walked away, headed into the mountains and never looked back." "That must have been difficult," Martha said, "being so young and alone." "I survived," Boone said simply, "and I learned that I could depend on myself, that I did not need a town or a boss or anyone telling me what to do." He looked at her then, his blue eyes serious. "I'm not saying I made the right choice, leaving my sisters behind. I send them money when I can, make sure they are taken care of. but I could not stay in that life. It was killing me, same as it killed my parents. Martha understood then why he had stepped in to help her. He saw in her situation an echo of his own past, a chance to prevent another person from being crushed by the greed and callousness of men like Granger. "Thank you for telling me," she said, "and thank you for helping me. I know it was not easy confronting Granger like that." "Confronting him was the easy part," Boone said with a slight smile. "Figuring out what happens next, that is the hard part." They remounted and continued on. As the afternoon wore on, Martha found herself growing drowsy despite the cold, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of Boone's presence. She caught herself nodding off more than once, her head falling back against his chest. "Rest if you need to," he said quietly. "I will keep you from falling." She wanted to protest, to maintain some sense of propriety, but exhaustion won out. She let her eyes close and drifted into a light sleep, trusting this stranger to keep her safe in a way she had not trusted anyone since her father died. When she woke, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. They had entered a valley, and ahead, nestled against a stand of pine trees, stood a cabin. It was larger than Martha had expected, solidly built of logs with a stone chimney. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she realized Boone must have left a fire banked before he rode to Dillon. "This is home," Boone said, dismounting and helping her down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. Boone steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Come inside and get warm. I will see to the horse." The cabin's interior was simple but well maintained. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire crackling cheerfully. There was a bed in one corner, piled with furs, and a small kitchen area with a table and 2 chairs. Shelves held supplies, tools, and a few books. It was clearly the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. Martha moved to the fire and held her hands out to the flames, feeling life return to her frozen fingers. Boone came in a few minutes later, stamping snow from his boots. "There is stew from yesterday in the pot," he said, moving to the hearth. "Should still be good. Are you hungry?" "Starving," Martha admitted. She had barely eaten in days, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to handle food. Boone ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table. Martha sat and took a bite, and the rich flavor of venison and vegetables made her moan with appreciation. "This is delicious," she said. "Cooking is easier when you hunt your own meat," Boone said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Tastes better, too." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, then Boone cleared his throat. "We should talk about the arrangement," he said. "I want you to know what to expect." Martha set down her spoon, suddenly nervous. "All right." "You can have the bed," Boone said. "I will sleep on the floor by the fire. I will not touch you or bother you in any way. This is your sanctuary for as long as you need it. I will hunt and provide food, and you can help with cooking and mending if you like, but you do not owe me anything. Is that clear?" Relief flooded through Martha. "Very clear, thank you." "I do not know what the solution is to your problem with Granger," Boone continued, "but we will figure something out. Maybe we can find a way to pay off the debt, or maybe we can get you safe passage to another town where you can start fresh. Whatever you decide, I will help you." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Martha asked, the question that had been nagging at her all day finally spilling out. Boone was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her face. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who deserves better than what life has handed her," he said finally. "And because I have the means to help, and it would be wrong not to." It was not a declaration of love or even attraction, but it was honest, and Martha appreciated that more than flowery words. "I will try not to be a burden," she said. "You are not a burden," Boone said firmly. "You are a person in need, and helping you is the right thing to do. That is all there is to it." But as Martha lay in bed that night, wrapped in her mother's quilt and listening to Boone's steady breathing from his bedroll by the fire, she thought there might be more to it than that. She thought about the way he had faced down Granger without hesitation, the gentleness with which he had helped her onto the horse, the care he had taken to make sure she knew she was safe with him. And she thought about how, for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she might actually have a future worth living. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Boone would wake before dawn and head out to check his trap lines, returning in the late morning with game or pelts. Martha would cook their meals, mend his clothes where they needed it, and work on small projects around the cabin. It was a simple life, but there was a peace to it that she had not expected. What surprised her most was how easy it was to be around Boone. He was a quiet man, not given to unnecessary chatter, but when he spoke, his words had weight. He told her stories about the mountains, about tracking elk through the snow, and watching eagles hunt from the cliffs. He taught her how to identify animal tracks and which plants were safe to eat. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's love of gardening, about the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher. "You still could," Boone said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Become a teacher, I mean. You're well-spoken and clearly educated. Any town would be lucky to have you." "Perhaps," Martha said, though the dream felt distant now, something from another life. "But I would need to find a town that was not under Granger's influence first." "There are plenty of towns in Montana," Boone said. "We could send inquiries, see if any are looking for a school teacher." The word "we" made Martha's heart skip. It suggested a partnership, a future beyond just hiding away in the mountains. She glanced at Boone, trying to read his expression in the firelight. His face was thoughtful, his eyes focused on the flames. "Would you come with me?" she asked, her voice small. "If I found a position somewhere?" Boone looked at her then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "If you wanted me to," he said carefully, "I would not want to leave you unprotected. At least until you were settled." "Just until I was settled?" Martha asked, surprised by the disappointment she felt. "That would be up to you," Boone said, his voice low. "I do not want to assume anything, Martha. You have been through hell, and the last thing you need is another man trying to control your life or push you into something you do not want." "You are nothing like Granger," Martha said fiercely. "You have never tried to control me or push me into anything." "Good," Boone said. "I never want you to feel that way." They were quiet for a moment, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Then Martha gathered her courage. "What if I wanted more than just protection?" she asked. "What if I wanted something else entirely?" Boone's eyes widened slightly, and she saw hope flicker across his face before he carefully schooled his expression. "What are you saying, Martha?" "I'm saying that these past few days, living here with you, have been the most peaceful and content I have felt in a very long time," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm saying that when I think about leaving, about going to some distant town to teach children I do not know, all I can think about is how much I would miss this cabin, these mountains, and you. I'm saying that maybe I do not want to just be protected. Maybe I want to be here because I choose to be here, because I want to be with you." Boone stood abruptly, and for a terrible moment, Martha thought she had misspoken, that she had misread the situation entirely. But then he was kneeling beside her chair, taking her hands in his large, calloused ones. "Martha," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to be sure about this. You have been through trauma, and sometimes people mistake gratitude for something deeper. I do not want you to wake up in a month or a year and realize you made a choice out of fear or necessity rather than genuine feeling." Martha pulled one hand free and placed it on his bearded cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath the rough hair. "I am sure," she said. "I've had plenty of time to think about this, Boone. You are a good man. You are kind and strong and honorable. When I am with you, I feel safe, yes, but I also feel seen. Like you actually care about what I think and feel, not just what you can get from me. That is rare, and it is precious, and I do not want to let it go." "I care about you," Boone said, his voice intense. "More than I should, probably, given how short a time we have known each other. But from the moment I saw you standing by your father's grave, so brave and alone, something in me just knew. This woman is special. This woman deserves every good thing in the world, and I wanted to be the one to give her those things." "Then give them to me," Martha whispered. "Give me a life here, with you. I do not need fancy clothes or a big house or a position in society. I just need honesty and kindness and someone who will stand beside me, not in front of me or behind me, but beside me as an equal." "You will have that," Boone promised. "I swear to you, Martha, if you choose this life, If you choose me, I will spend every day proving that you made the right decision." "I know I have," Martha said, and then she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative and exploring. But as Boone's arms came around her, pulling her close, it deepened into something more passionate. Martha felt heat spread through her body, chasing away the last of the cold and fear that had gripped her for so long. In Boone's embrace, she felt truly safe for the first time since her father's death. More than safe. She felt wanted, cherished, desired in a way that had nothing to do with debts or obligations, and everything to do with genuine affection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "We should do this properly," he said. "Get married. I want everyone to know you are choosing this, that you are not just some woman I took to the mountains. I want you to have respectability and legal protection." "How would we do that?" Martha asked practically. "We cannot go back to Dillon, and I doubt there is a preacher within 50 miles of here." "There is a circuit preacher who comes through the settlements," Boone said. "Visits once a month. We could ride down to meet him at the next settlement over, about 3 days from here. Get married properly, then come back here and start our life together." 3 days, Martha said, smiling. "I think I can wait 3 days." "I'm not sure I can," Boone said with a grin, and he kissed her again. The 3 days before they left for the settlement felt both endless and far too short. Martha and Boone existed in a strange limbo, not quite courting, but not yet married, aware of their feelings for each other but holding back from going too far. Boone was unfailingly respectful, keeping his distance at night and careful not to compromise her in any way. But there were stolen kisses and long conversations by the fire, and Martha learned more about the man she had agreed to marry. She learned that he was 30 years old, 8 years her senior, and that he had been living in the mountains for 12 years. She learned that he had a wry sense of humor and a love of books, that the small collection on his shelf was well worn from multiple readings. She learned that he could play the harmonica and sometimes did in the evenings, simple folk tunes that made her want to dance. She learned that he had a temper, though he kept it carefully controlled, and that the only thing that truly made him angry was injustice and cruelty. She learned that he had thought about leaving the mountains more than once, but had never had a reason to until now. "I stayed away because I thought there was nothing in civilization for me but pain," he told her one night. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just waiting for the right person to make me want to be part of the world again." "I do not want to take you away from something you love," Martha said, worried suddenly that she was asking too much. "You are not taking me away from anything," Boone assured her. "You are giving me something better. The mountains will still be here. We can visit, hunt, trap, whatever we want. But now I will have a reason to come back to something more than just an empty cabin. I will have a home, Martha, a real home with someone I love." The word love hung in the air, warm and precious. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too," she said. "I know it is fast, but I do. I love you, Boone." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest. "We are going to have a good life," he promised. "I will make sure of it." On the 4th day, they set out for the settlement. The journey was long and cold, but Martha did not mind. She was wrapped in furs and held secure in Boone's arms as they rode, and she felt only anticipation for what was to come. The settlement was little more than a trading post and a handful of cabins, but the circuit preacher was there, a kindly older man named Reverend Walsh, who asked no questions about where they had come from or why they were seeking to marry. He performed the ceremony in the trading post, with the trader and his wife serving as witnesses. Martha wore her best dress, carefully cleaned and pressed, and Boone had trimmed his beard and hair, looking almost civilized. "Do you, Boone Eldridge, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Walsh asked. "I do," Boone said, his voice firm and sure. "And do you, Martha Bennett, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Martha said, her heart full to bursting. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Boone kissed her then, in front of God and witnesses, and Martha felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She was no longer Martha Bennett, the orphaned daughter of a miner, drowning in debt and running from a cruel man's demands. She was Martha Eldridge, wife of a good man, starting a new life in the wilderness. They spent their wedding night in a room above the trading post, a small space with a narrow bed and thin walls, but it was theirs. Boone made love to her with a gentleness and passion that took her breath away. And when she woke in the morning, wrapped in his arms, Martha knew she had made the right choice. They returned to the cabin in the mountains, and life took on a new rhythm. Now, Martha was not just a guest, but a full partner in their life together. She learned to smoke meat and preserve food for the long winter months. She learned to identify the medicinal plants Boone used for treating small injuries and illnesses. She learned to shoot his rifle, though she was not very good at it, and to set snares for rabbits. In turn, Boone seemed to blossom with her presence. He smiled more, laughed more, and the hard edges that the wilderness had carved into him softened. He built her a rocking chair for the porch and carved her name into the wood. He brought her wildflowers in the summer and fresh meat in the winter. He held her at night and told her stories and made her feel like the most precious thing in his world. But their happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that Granger was still out there, still angry, still powerful. Boone heard through his occasional trips to the trading post that the mine owner had not forgotten about Martha. He had put out word that she was a thief and that anyone who helped her would answer to him. "We need to deal with this," Boone said one night. "We cannot live our whole lives looking over our shoulders." "What can we do?" Martha asked. "We have no power against him." "Maybe we do," Boone said thoughtfully. "Maybe we have more power than we think." Over the next few weeks, Boone made careful inquiries. He spoke to other trappers, to traders, to anyone who might have information about Silas Granger. What he learned was enlightening. Granger had made many enemies over the years. He cheated his workers, cut corners on safety, and used intimidation to maintain his control over Dillon. But he was also vulnerable. His mine was heavily mortgaged, his personal finances stretched thin by extravagant living, and there were rumors that he had been skimming from the company funds. "If someone could prove he was embezzling," Boone said, "he would lose everything. The investors would pull out, and he would be ruined." "How would we prove that?" Martha asked. "We cannot exactly walk into his office and demand to see his books." "No," Boone agreed, "but I know someone who might be able to help." The someone turned out to be a man named Jack Thornton, a former bookkeeper for the mining company who had been fired by Granger for asking too many questions. Jack lived in a cabin not far from Boone's place, eking out a living as a prospector. He was a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers and a deep grudge against his former employer. "I kept copies of the ledgers," Jack admitted when Boone and Martha approached him. "I knew something was wrong with the numbers, and I thought I might need proof someday to protect myself. I've been sitting on them for 2 years, too scared to do anything with them." "What do they show?" Boone asked. "That Granger has been pocketing at least 30% of the mine's profits," Jack said. "Money that should have gone to investors and safety improvements. He has been living high while his workers die in unsafe conditions. If the investors saw these ledgers, they would crucify him." "We need to get them to the investors," Martha said. "But how?" "I know one of the primary investors," Jack said slowly. "A man named Harding who lives in Helena. He came out once to tour the mine and was horrified by what he saw. Granger convinced him it was temporary, that improvements were being made. If Harding saw proof that his money was being stolen, he would act." "Then we take the ledgers to Helena," Boone said decisively. The journey to Helena was long and potentially dangerous. They would have to pass through territory Granger controlled, and if he learned what they were doing, he might try to stop them. But the alternative was living forever under the shadow of his threats. They set out a week later, the three of them together. Jack rode his own horse, the ledgers carefully wrapped in oilcloth and tucked in his saddlebags. Martha rode with Boone, a rifle slung across her back. Boone had taught her to shoot properly in preparation for the journey, and while she was still no expert, she could at least defend herself if necessary. They traveled carefully, avoiding the main roads and keeping to the backcountry. It took them 4 days to reach Helena, 4 days of sleeping rough and staying alert for danger. But they arrived safely, and Jack led them to the home of Samuel Harding, a prosperous-looking house on the edge of town. Harding was a portly man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a shrewd manner. He listened intently as Jack explained what he had discovered, his face growing darker with each revelation. When Jack presented the ledgers, Harding spent an hour poring over them, his expression turning from anger to fury. "This is worse than I imagined," he said finally. "Granger has not only stolen from me, but he has also falsified reports to the Territorial Mining Commission. He could face criminal charges for this, not just civil penalties. "We want him stopped," Boone said. "He tried to force my wife into marriage to cover a debt her father supposedly owed, a debt that was incurred because Granger's unsafe mind killed her father. He uses fear and intimidation to control people, and it needs to end." Harding looked at Martha with sympathy. "I am sorry for what you have endured, Mrs. Eldridge. I assure you Granger will answer for his crimes. I will take this information to the territorial governor and to the other investors. Within a month, Granger will be finished." "A month is a long time," Martha said. "What if he tries to retaliate before then?" "I will send a telegram to the marshal in Dillon today," Harding said. "I will explain that there is an ongoing investigation into Granger's business practices and that any attempt to intimidate or harm witnesses will result in immediate arrest. That should keep him in check." It was the best they could hope for. They stayed in Helena for 3 more days while Harding set his plan in motion. Martha watched as telegrams were sent and meetings held as the machinery of justice slowly began to turn. It felt surreal, this sudden shift from being powerless to having powerful allies. On their last night in Helena, Boone took Martha to dinner at a real restaurant, the first she had visited in over a year. They ate steak and potatoes and fresh bread, and Martha wore the new dress Boone had bought her, a simple calico print that made her feel almost pretty. "When this is over," Boone said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "what do you want to do? Stay in the mountains? Move to a town? We can go anywhere, be anyone you want." Martha thought about it carefully. "I love the mountains," she said slowly. "I love the peace and the simplicity of our life there. But I also think I would like to be part of a community again. Maybe not Dillon, but somewhere we could have neighbors and friends, somewhere we could raise children." Boone's eyes lit up. "Children? Someday," Martha said, blushing, "if we are blessed with them." "I would like that," Boone said softly. "I would like that very much." They returned to the cabin in the mountains with lighter hearts. Weeks passed, then a month, and word began to trickle in through Boone's contacts. Granger had been arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud. The mine had been taken over by new management. Investors were suing for restitution. The man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was suddenly revealed as nothing more than a common thief, and he was facing years in prison. "It is over," Boone said when the news reached them. "You are safe now, Martha. He cannot hurt you anymore." Martha felt tears of relief stream down her face. She had not realized how much tension she had been carrying, how much fear, until it was suddenly lifted. Boone held her as she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort. "We should go back to Dillon," she said when she had composed herself. "I want to reclaim what is mine. My father's cabin, his possessions. I want to lay claim to what I am owed." "Are you sure?" Boone asked. "You do not need to confront that place again if you do not want to." "I need to," Martha said firmly. "I need to face it without fear and reclaim my history. My father was a good man, and he deserves to be remembered properly." So they rode back to Dillon, arriving on a warm summer day 6 months after they had fled. The town had changed in their absence. New management at the mine had brought new policies and better wages. The company store had been replaced by an independent mercantile, and Granger's mansion on the hill stood empty, a monument to greed and fallen pride. Martha walked through the town with her head held high, Boone at her side. People stared, whispered, but no one tried to stop her. She went to the cabin that had been her home and found it occupied by a young family. The wife answered the door, a baby on her hip, and looked startled to see Martha. "I am sorry," Martha said gently. "I do not mean to intrude. This was my father's cabin. I just wanted to see it one more time." The young woman's face softened with understanding. "You are Martha Bennett. I heard about you, about what Granger tried to do. I am so sorry for what you went through." "Thank you," Martha said. "Would it be all right if I came in, just for a moment?" The woman stepped aside, and Martha entered the cabin. It looked different now, filled with someone else's belongings, someone else's life. But the bones of it were the same, and she could still feel her father's presence in the walls he had built, the hearth he had laid. She went to the fireplace and ran her hand along the mantel. There, carved into the wood where it would not be easily seen, were the initials of her parents, TB and MB, her father and mother, forever linked. Martha traced the letters with her finger, saying a silent goodbye. "Be happy here," she said to the young woman. "This was a good home. It deserves a good family." They left the cabin and walked to the cemetery. Martha placed wildflowers on her father's grave, and Boone stood respectfully beside her. "I found a good man, Papa," she whispered, "just like you were. I am happy. I hope you can see that, wherever you are." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, and Martha chose to believe it was her father's way of answering. They stayed in Dillon for 3 days, tying up loose ends. The new mine management agreed to forgive her father's debt entirely, acknowledging that he had paid with his life for years of loyal service. They even provided a small settlement, enough money to buy land or start a business if Martha and Boone chose to do so. On their last day in town, they visited the land office. Boone inquired about property for sale, and to Martha's surprise, he purchased a small parcel just outside of town. It had a good stream, plenty of timber, and fertile soil. "I thought you loved the mountains," Martha said as they rode out to look at the land. "I do," Boone said, "but you were right when you said we need community. We can build a house here, close enough to town to have neighbors, but far enough for privacy. We can keep the cabin in the mountains for when we want to get away. Best of both worlds." Martha looked at the land, imagining a house, a garden, children playing in the yard. "I love it," she said. They began building in the fall, and by the time winter set in, they had a small but sturdy house with a large fireplace and 2 bedrooms. Martha planted a garden in the spring, vegetables and flowers, creating beauty out of the raw earth. Boone continued to hunt and trap, but also hired himself out as a guide, leading wealthy Easterners on hunting expeditions through the mountains. It brought in steady money and allowed him to stay connected to the wilderness he loved. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Martha's father, was born in the winter of 1879. Boone cried when he held his son for the first time, this giant of a man brought to tears by the tiny life in his arms. "He is perfect," Boone whispered. "Martha, he is absolutely perfect." Martha smiled through her exhaustion. "He has your eyes," she said, "that same blue." Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Lily, after Martha's mother. She was a spirited child with her father's stubbornness and her mother's quick mind. The house filled with laughter and noise and all the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Martha sometimes thought back on that terrible day in the cemetery when Granger had made his demand, and she marveled at how life could change. She had been so alone, so frightened, and now she had everything she had ever dreamed of and more. She had a husband who loved and respected her, children who brought her joy, and a community that valued her contributions. She taught Sunday school at the church and started a small school for the miners' children, using the settlement money from the mine to buy books and supplies. It was not the grand career she had once imagined, but it was meaningful work that made a difference in young lives. Boone continued to grow and change as well. He became known in the region as a man of integrity and skill, someone who could be trusted and relied upon. He served occasionally as a deputy marshal when needed, using his knowledge of the wilderness to track outlaws and rescue lost travelers. But he always came home to Martha and the children, and that was what mattered most. Years passed. Thomas grew into a tall, strong boy who loved the mountains as much as his father. Lily became a voracious reader with dreams of becoming a doctor. A third child, another son named Samuel, arrived when Martha was 29, completing their family. One evening, when they had been married for 8 years, Martha and Boone sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The children were asleep inside, and the world was peaceful. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked, "giving up your solitary life in the mountains for all this noise and responsibility?" Boone pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single second. You gave me more than I ever thought I could have, Martha. You gave me a reason to be part of the world again. You gave me love and family and purpose. How could I ever regret that?" "I was so scared that day you came to my door," Martha admitted. "So scared of everything, of being alone, of Granger, of the future. And then you appeared like something out of a dream, this big mountain man who was willing to fight for me when no one else would." "I am glad I came," Boone said. "Best decision I ever made." Mine too, Martha said, choosing to go with you, to trust you, to love you. Best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In the distance, an owl hooted, and closer by, the gentle sounds of their children breathing in sleep drifted through the open window. We should go to the mountain cabin this summer, Boone said. Show the children where it all started. Teach them about the wilderness. I would like that, Martha said. Thomas especially would love it. He is a lot like I was at that age, Boone said fondly. Always wanting to explore, always curious about what is over the next ridge. Just promise me you will teach him to be careful, Martha said. The mountains can be dangerous. I will teach him to respect them, Boone said. Same as I respect them. The mountains give back what you put into them. Respect and care yield bounty and beauty. Carelessness and greed yield only tragedy. Martha thought of Silas Granger, rotting in a prison somewhere, his greed and cruelty having cost him everything. She thought of her father, who had worked honestly and died too young, but had been loved and mourned. She thought of Boone, who had chosen kindness when he could have chosen indifference, and how that choice had changed both their lives forever. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Boone replied, more than words can express. Inside the house, one of the children stirred, and Martha rose to check on them. Boone followed, and together they stood in the doorway of the children's room, watching Thomas, Lily, and Samuel sleep peacefully. This is what matters, Boone whispered. This right here. Family, love, building something good and lasting. Yes, Martha agreed. This is everything. They returned to the porch and sat together under the stars, talking and dreaming about the future. They spoke of the day when Thomas would be old enough to run trap lines with his father, when Lily might go east to study medicine, when Samuel would find his own path in the world. They spoke of growing old together, of becoming grandparents someday, of all the years stretching out before them filled with possibility. The night grew late, and finally they went inside, banking the fire and climbing into bed. Boone pulled Martha close, and she nestled against his broad chest, feeling safe and loved. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? Boone asked. For saving me, for loving me, for giving me this life. You saved me too, Boone said. You reminded me that there was more to life than just surviving. You taught me how to really live again. So thank you, Martha. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not have much to offer except his heart. Your heart was more than enough, Martha said. It was everything. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful together. Outside, the Montana night settled over the valley, the mountains standing eternal watch over the small house where love had taken root and flourished. The years continued to roll by like the seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. When Thomas turned 15, he expressed a desire to become a guide like his father, and Boone began teaching him the skills he would need. They spent weeks at a time in the mountain cabin, and Thomas learned to track, hunt, and survive in the wilderness. He learned to read the weather, to find water in dry country, to treat injuries with natural remedies. Most importantly, he learned to respect the land and the creatures that inhabited it. Lily, true to her early promise, proved to be brilliant and determined. At 16, she began studying with the town doctor, a kindly old man who recognized her talent and encouraged her ambitions. He taught her what he could, and when she turned 18, he helped her secure a place at a medical college in the East. The day they put her on the stagecoach, Martha cried tears of both pride and sorrow. Her daughter was leaving to chase her dreams, and though it was what Martha wanted for her, it was hard to let go. She will come back, Boone assured her, holding her as the stagecoach disappeared into the distance. She loves us and loves this place. She will come back. And she did 3 years later, with a medical degree and a quiet, scholarly young man named David who loved her fiercely. They married in the small church where Martha taught Sunday school, and Lily opened a medical practice in Dillon, serving the community with skill and compassion. Samuel, the youngest, proved to have a talent for working with his hands. He apprenticed with a carpenter and eventually opened his own furniture-making business, crafting beautiful pieces from the wood Boone brought down from the mountains. His work became sought after throughout the territory, and he married a sweet girl named Emma, who shared his love of craftsmanship. As Martha and Boone watched their children grow and flourish, they grew older themselves. Silver threads appeared in Boone's dark hair and beard, and Martha's face gained the soft lines that came from years of smiling and living fully. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experience and the knowledge that they had built something truly good together. They became grandparents, first to Thomas's twin boys, then to Lily's 3 daughters, and finally to Samuel's son and daughter. The house that had once seemed so spacious now filled regularly with the laughter and chaos of grandchildren, and Martha and Boone could not have been happier. One day, when Martha was 45 and Boone was 53, they made the journey back to the mountain cabin alone, leaving the grandchildren with their parents. It had been years since they had spent time there, just the two of them, and they wanted to recapture some of that early simplicity. The cabin was exactly as they had left it, preserved and maintained by occasional visits. Boone built a fire in the old hearth, and Martha made coffee in the same pot she had used all those years ago. They sat together on the porch, looking out at the mountains that had been the backdrop to their love story. "Do you remember the first night you brought me here?" Martha asked. "How scared I was, how uncertain about everything." "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Boone said, "coming into the wilderness with a stranger because it was better than the alternative. Trusting me when you had no reason to." "I had every reason to," Martha said. "You proved yourself trustworthy from the very beginning." "I fell in love with you that first night," Boone admitted, "watching you eat stew by the fire, seeing the strength in you despite everything you had been through. I knew then that I wanted to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "You have," Martha said softly. "You have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible." They spent 3 days at the cabin, hiking, talking, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was like going back in time, to those early days when everything was new and uncertain, but filled with possibility. And when they returned to their house in the valley, they brought with them a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. The years continued their steady march. Martha and Boone celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, then their 25th, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Dillon grew and prospered, becoming a real town with a railroad connection and new businesses. The mine, under honest management, provided good jobs and decent wages. The legacy of Silas Granger faded into history, a cautionary tale about greed and corruption. Martha continued to teach, even as her hair turned silver and her steps grew slower. She loved watching young minds grow and develop, loved being part of the community that had embraced her all those years ago. Boone continued to guide and hunt, though he took fewer long expeditions now, preferring to stay close to home and family. When Martha was 58 and Boone was 66, they took one final trip to the mountain cabin. Boone's health had been declining, his strong body finally showing the wear of a lifetime spent in hard physical labor. He did not complain, but Martha could see the effort it cost him to make the climb, and she worried. "We do not have to do this," she said as they rested halfway up the trail. "We can turn back." "No," Boone said firmly. "I want to see it one more time, want to sit on that porch with you and look at the mountains, want to remember where it all started." So they continued, and when they finally reached the cabin, Boone sank into the rocking chair he had built for Martha all those decades ago with a sigh of relief and satisfaction. "Made it," he said with a tired smile. Martha sat beside him, holding his hand, and they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. It was beautiful, achingly so, and Martha felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Do not cry," Boone said gently. "We have had a good life, Martha, better than I ever thought I deserved." "You deserved everything good," Martha said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known." "I am just a man who got lucky," Boone said. "Lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. Lucky enough to meet you." They stayed at the cabin for a week, and each day Boone seemed to gain a little strength, as if the mountains themselves were renewing him. When they finally descended back to the valley, he seemed almost like his old self, and Martha allowed herself to hope. But hope is not always enough. The following winter, Boone contracted pneumonia. Lily came and did everything she could with her medical knowledge, but some things cannot be cured, only endured. For 3 weeks Boone fought, and Martha sat beside his bed, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together. "Do you remember the day we got married?" she asked, her voice soft in the quiet of the sick room. "How Reverend Walsh pronounced us man and wife in that little trading post." "Best day of my life," Boone whispered, his voice weak. "Except maybe the day Thomas was born, and Lily, and Samuel. Hard to choose." "We had so many good days," Martha said, tears streaming down her face. "So many beautiful moments." "Do not be sad," Boone said, gripping her hand with what strength he had left. "I am not. I got to live a full life, Martha. Got to love you, raise our children, see our grandchildren born. Not everyone gets that. I am grateful for every single day." "I am not ready to let you go," Martha said brokenly. "I know," Boone said, "but it is time. Take care of the children, the grandchildren. Tell them about me, about the mountains, about the importance of standing up for what is right. Promise me." "I promise," Martha whispered. Boone smiled then, a peaceful expression settling over his weathered features. "I love you, Martha Eldridge. From the first moment I saw you to this very last moment, I have loved you with everything I am." "I love you too," Martha said, "forever." Boone died that night, peacefully, with Martha holding his hand. The whole town mourned him, for he had become a beloved figure, known for his integrity and kindness. They buried him in the cemetery next to Martha's father, two good men who had shaped her life in profound ways. Martha grieved deeply, but she did not break. She had Boone's strength in her, and she had their children and grandchildren who needed her. She continued to live in the house they had built together, surrounded by memories and love. She taught for 2 more years before finally retiring, and she spent her days with her family, telling them stories about their grandfather and the life they had shared. One spring day, when Martha was 65, Thomas came to her with a proposal. "I want to fix up the mountain cabin," he said. "Make it a place where the whole family can go, a kind of retreat. What do you think?" Martha smiled through her tears. "Your father would have loved that idea." So Thomas and his sons worked through the summer, repairing and expanding the cabin. They added a second room, rebuilt the porch, and made it comfortable for extended stays. And when it was finished, the whole family made a pilgrimage to the mountains, 3 generations gathering in the place where Martha and Boone's love story had truly begun. Martha sat on the porch in her rocking chair, watching her children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren play and explore. She could feel Boone's presence in the mountains, in the wind that rustled through the pines, in the clear blue sky that matched his eyes. "We did good," she said softly, as if he could hear her. "Our family is strong and good and full of love. Just like you wanted." She lived for 10 more years, surrounded by love and respect. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 75, the whole town turned out for her funeral. She was buried beside Boone, and her headstone read simply, "Martha Eldridge, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher. She taught us all how to love." The house Martha and Boone built remained in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to the love that had created it. The mountain cabin became a family tradition, a place where each new generation learned about their ancestors and the values they had held dear. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew down from the mountains and the stars shone bright over Dillon, Montana, people said you could still feel the presence of Boone and Martha Eldridge, 2 souls who had found each other in the darkest of times and created something beautiful that would endure forever. Their story became a legend in Dillon, told and retold, a reminder that love can triumph over cruelty, that courage can overcome fear, and that sometimes the most unlikely meetings lead to the most extraordinary lives. The mine owner who had tried to claim Martha as payment for her father's accident had faded into infamy, a villain in a cautionary tale. But the mountain man who had settled it differently, who had offered protection and love instead of demands and threats, became a hero, his memory honored and his legacy living on in the strong, loving family he and Martha had created together. And so their story ended, not with tragedy or regret, but with love triumphant, family flourishing, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. It was a fitting end for 2 people who had faced impossible odds and chosen love over fear, courage over compliance, and each other over all else. The mountains still stand watch over Dillon, Montana, eternal and unchanging. But the lives that were lived in their shadow, the love that bloomed in the wilderness, the family that grew from one brave choice made on a cold March morning, those things changed everything. They proved that one person standing up against injustice can make a difference, that love is stronger than power, and that the best way to honor those we have lost is to build something beautiful in their memory. Martha and Boone Eldridge did exactly that. They built a life, a family, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in doing so, they created a love story for the ages, a tale of the Wild West that was not about gunfights and gold strikes, but about something far more valuable and rare: true love, freely given and joyfully received, lasting until death and beyond.